Well, we are the Reimagining Art, Ownership, and Legacy panel. So excited to have everyone here in person and everybody who's streaming in from all around the world. All right, let's introduce more fully our panelists. To my left, we have the incredible Seneca, also known as All-Seeing Seneca. She's a visual artist. Her last collection premiered at Art Basel, painter, fine artist, and also the lead artist for an NFT project y'all have probably heard of called the Bored Ape Yacht Club. So to her left, we have Erick Calderon. Calderon. I should have prepped that before. Also known as Snowfro. Snowfro is the founder of Art Blocks and the creator of Chromie Squiggle. Yeah. To his left, we have Ryan, better known as ThankYouX. He started his career really in street stenciling and creating Andy Warhols in Miami and LA and New York. Transitioned to being a painter and a sculptor, has subsequently gotten pretty prominent for geometric cubes and large abstract works, and in 2020 started getting into NFTs with a number of collaborations and drops on Nifty Gateway. Also a painting commissioned or a work commissioned by Sir Paul McCartney. Woo. And to the left of him is Tyler Hobbs, one of the most renowned generative artists of our time and the creator of Fidenzas. Yeah. So an incredible panel of artists here. The title of this panel is like Reimagining Art, Ownership, and Legacy. So I wanted to really throw it to all of you, and maybe we'll start here, Seneca, with you if you want to talk about how have you reimagined your art? How has your art changed since discovering NFTs, the smart contracts, the blockchain? We can also go reverse order if we want to start with Tyler.
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
Sure.
Yeah, for me, it was a really drastic change. You know, I've been practicing generative art for a long time, and as a digital artist, you know, pre-blockchain, you have limited options for how to sell your work. I was primarily selling unique prints, so I would use the algorithms that I wrote to generate a lot of unique pieces of artwork. I would curate those down to a few of my favorite per algorithm, create a unique print of that, and sell just one copy of it. And that was how I worked for many years until I ran across Art Blocks, which is the platform that Erick started. And this just really introduced a totally new way for generative artists to create and sell their work. And be created as part of the crypto transaction. You can provably see the artwork being created at the time that it's purchased. So every collector is guaranteed to have a unique work that's reproducible for all time. And it's just a really different way for the collector to engage with the work and to understand the work. And it's a much more natural fit, honestly, than prints are. So it's really fascinating to see collectors engage with this new form of ownership and how it's changed the relationship between the artists and the collectors. It's a much closer connection now.
Does it put more pressure on the artist? Because I get the sense that previously, generative artists, you'd print out a whole bunch of different options and then pick your favorite works and be like, these are what I want to display. And now it's like live and the collector's right there getting it as it's coming out.
Yeah, there's no.
You picked the bad one. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, what you gonna do?
Yeah, there's no margin
redo.
for error. Yeah, everything that comes out of the algorithm is permanent and goes to the collector. They don't want bad work to go to the collector, so it introduces a new artistic challenge, which is actually a wonderful element of it. To me, I like that it introduces that new challenge. So I think that's a bonus in some ways.
Move down the line, Ryan. I'm curious. You've dabbled in a lot of different mediums and how NFTs have changed your process.
It's kind of interesting because like now I just think about it like a little bit from the start, not in the sense of like what I'm creating, but how I create it. So if I'm painting, everything I do starts with a painting first. So if I start a painting, generally, like in the traditional world, I would just like paint and then paint and paint, and then when I'm done, take a photo of it. But now I'm kind of like documenting every step of the way so that I know, okay, if I have this layer, I can animate this on top of this so that I'm not limited later on once we bring it into 3D. And yeah, I think that's kind of the main thing. A lot of times I just paint just to paint. I don't necessarily know what's going where yet, and I build up a collection, I guess, before I take it digitally and make it into NFTs.
You've done a number of collaborations in NFT world. I think your first drop was with JN Silva, which is a really cool, like, you know, digital,
yeah, JN.
digital photography blend. Is that something, were you doing a lot of collaborations before you entered NFTs, or is that something that's really been part of your journey since?
I've definitely done collaborations, but I wouldn't say it was a big part. But I think NFTs, that's one of my favorite things, is because I think my favorite part of Web3 is that it's like, it does offer more of a collaborative situation where it's like, I don't know smart contracts, I don't know algorithms, I don't know like that side of it, so I can partner with someone who does, and they might not know the fine art side of it, and we can collaborate together to make something. My experience, at least coming in 2020, was like just being open and being like, I don't know how to do this side. Does anybody, like in my circle or whatever, and we can, you know, figure it out, and they might reach out to me for the same situation for what they're doing, and I don't know, like I'm really big on collaboration. I hope to do like a lot more of it.
Awesome. There's a playfulness, I feel like, in Web3 that's, you know, you get to have because it's so early.
I might have my mind expanded because of that, you know.
Erick, how about you? You come from a funny background of you're artistic, you're futuristic, you're tech-oriented. What was your evolution here?
I feel like I go through life often having conversations with my wife about how the things that we want in this world don't exist. And this is one thing that just didn't exist. And I didn't even know what Art Blocks was going to be. I definitely didn't to get to the point that it got today, but there was a lot of moving parts. I was coding, I was doing projection mapping stuff, I was studying screens and monitors and trying to understand, you know, what technology implied as it got better over time. And there was a really nice fit there with what happened with Art Blocks, with the idea that, you know, something that is very meaningful to me for Art Blocks is that it's generated algorithmically and it's agnostic of whatever the resolution is. So every time that you see an output from Art Blocks piece, regardless of what size of the monitor, it's being displayed in full resolution. And that means that in 30 years, when we have 24K or 128K screens, you will see the art exactly the way that we're seeing it today. And that's very important to me as someone that's watched technology. A GIF from 5 years ago, it might already start feeling small or upsampled. There's a lot of things that kind of came together. It's changed my life in so many different ways, not just in the art practice that I have, but also in just like the way that I interact with artists and the way that I get to interact with the community. And it's been a lot of fun.
And my understanding punks, you had this thought of like, okay, why can't I pick the punks I want? What if I didn't know what I was getting before I got it? And it was almost more like a sports card reveal. Is that how you ended up with the mechanism we have with Art Blocks today, where you don't know what you're getting until you've minted it, essentially?
Yeah, I selfishly claimed a bunch of zombie CryptoPunks. I'm sitting there thinking,
must be nice.
Like, why do I get this privilege to claim these? And they're 0.8% probability of hitting. And in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, well, if I press claim, then I should have a 0.8% chance of getting a zombie, not 100% chance of getting a zombie, just because that's what was available. So that's where the concept, I guess, fundamentally of on-demand generative minting came from, and that tied into a lot of other hobbies and stuff. And that's where we are today. It's really fun to see it.
Seneca, tell us your journey since NFTs.
Well, I think first and foremost, the most important aspect that changed about my work with NFTs is really the psychology and the relationship between me and my work. I've been painting in the digital medium for as long as I can remember, and I felt like very sequestered to the commercial arts field because, people amongst my audience, professionally, personally, I just did not see my digital paintings as like works of art. So, developing that craft over the years. But yeah, it's just like being mind blown through this whole journey. As you know, I've came out in a very explosive way, and it's very, you know, it was conflicted, but very significant, I think, to my practice and any future mentally unstableness when it comes to my process. But yeah, it's been incredible and scary.
Had you done generative art before Bored Apes?
No.
How was that as like a process shift as you and figuring that out? What was that experience like?
Well, I think for me, I think the generative part of that project was more to do with the technique rather than maybe the concept. I think it was more about the delivery. So when you do generative art, it's about, well, okay, there are different structures with generative art, right? For that one, it's like you get a unique piece with every release, and that establishes a certain attachment style between you and your audience and whomever collects that piece. And it's about pride, it's about a bit of entitlement, and I'm very interested in that relationship. And when it comes to Bored Apes, I mean, it's just a matter of me designing what fits on top of each other, and that maybe affected the process a bit, but not so much the concept. Yeah.
And it might be worth distinguishing, and folks know this, but you know, a whole diversity of generative art on this stage, where you have an art blocks model that's very like machine and man, you know, working together to create something. I imagine the Bored Ape situation, you had drawn many different layers, and then a machine's putting those layers together in different configurations, but it's different styles. It might be worth, Erick, do you want to give a quick definition of generative art, and then I would love to hear folks talk about what they think the biggest misperceptions of generative art in the world are today.
Sure. Well, I think it starts with algorithmic art. Algorithmic art is any art that's created using code, and so code establishes what you see or hear as a result. And generative art is adding a layer of randomization onto that. So where that randomization comes from could be your spacebar, and just kind of like creating random variables within, or from the blockchain, which is how the art blocks model works. There's some things though that, for example, I know with CryptoPunks, maybe with Bored Apes as well, that if you want to be able to guarantee 100% uniqueness from between each output, you either have to have trillions of possibilities so that you don't have a collision, or you have to have the ability to curate what comes out of the algorithm. So I know, for example, and this is something that to me is really beautiful about the word generative art, because CryptoPunks were maybe one of the first NFTs, or at least the widely successful as a generator. The Larva Labs guys didn't draw every pixel. They wrote an algorithm that created a bunch of punks. And they had a couple collisions, and collisions being two that are identical. So they actually kind of had to go in and manually make sure that each were individual. If you have 1 million possibilities for an output, and you have 10,000 that are going to come out, even though that sounds like a lot, 1 million is not actually enough to guarantee that you're not going to have a collision. In fact, you're very likely to have a collision. You need billions, if not trillions in some cases, to just make sure, to guarantee, and there's never a guarantee anyways, that you're not going to have a collision. And so the difference here is that in the generative art form of art blocks, where we talked earlier, there's no curation for each individual output. The artist really has to craft their algorithm to guarantee and to assure that everything's going to be the way they want it in advance. And they also need to make sure that they add enough entropy, and this is the hardest part, adding enough entropy for the addition size to make sure that each of the outputs is unique. And not just unique, but meaningfully unique. You know, not just like dots in a different part of the screen, because that doesn't feel meaningful. It's a subject matter uniqueness, and I think there's something really special about the way art blocks artists have been able to execute that.
Yeah,
I want Tyler to answer, but I just want to, I guess, like frame set here, which is, for anybody who doesn't understand, part of the reason that I think it's so important to focus on generative art in this panel, in addition to having like most experts on generative art, is it
I'm not an expert on generative
art. But the two people sitting next to you are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm in between you.
And you've done it now, you know, because of NFTs, and it feels like generative art is this huge part of NFTs and blockchain, and it's this like intensely digitally native form of art that just seems like inevitably going to explode over time because of its kind of man-machine blend. So anyways, that's why I think it's really cool to focus on this here. And then go ahead, Tyler, would love to hear your
Yeah, I mean, I think part of why it's been really successful and part of why it's having such a big influence is that it's like a very scalable art form, right? Like software makes things scalable, and generative art, or algorithmic art specifically, is like a software-based approach to creating artwork. And just to build on what Erick was describing, it's you're not as the artist, you're not really thinking about the individual output pieces. You're thinking about the entire possible space of potential outputs. That's really, to me, like that's what the work is that entire space that you're designing. And so it's a unique challenge to try to think about that full space. Try to think about what interesting dimensions can you introduce to that? What interesting corners of it might exist? But also, how do you make it, cohesive and to tell one unified story, right? To still have like one vision. Like it's very clear when you see a Bored Ape what a Bored Ape is, right? There's like a clear vision and style to it. So I think the generative artist has this interesting tension of like, how can I scale up the artwork but keep the vision focused as well? It's a push and pull that the artist has to work through with this art form.
One of the reasons I think Fidenz's was so incredibly successful was because you had this unbelievable variety while keeping the quality of the art really high, which I think people who don't understand generative art don't understand just what a challenge that is, especially for an algorithm that you can't tweak once it's like once it's on the blockchain. Sorry.
Can I just add how tasteful I think Fidenz's are, and it's just nuances and sophistication every line. I mean, funny story, I snuck into your show at bright moments. And I was like, hey.
I don't know. She's just like, hey, I'm Seneca. What's up? I was like,
but wow, what a pleasure to be there, to be in the presence of that. And I had not even appreciated generative art till now. So
thank you.
I'm just honored to be here.
Yeah,
Just saying.
I love that. Do you think generative art is still broadly misunderstood and like undervalued as an art form in the wider world? Like, do people give you a hard time about it like being art in the way that, in early days people were like, photography is not art or whatever?
I mean,
it's changing,
there's a lot of skeptics like.
Oh, go ahead. From someone who's like not a generative artist, from the outside, I see it as a growing thing actually. Like I think that like it was very well respected by like a niche audience, and it's just slowly being recognized. Like now you're looking at things like Pace from the traditional art world, doing partnerships with art blocks, and I think that right there shows that there's like a big interest from a world who maybe even like 6 months to a year ago would have just wrote it off as not art.
I mean, it's clearly a medium like paint or like any other medium.
Exactly. I think that in the future you're going to look at things like even just digital art or generative art, and it's going to be like Picasso, medium, oil on canvas, and then you're going to be like, like chromey squiggles. It's going to be like
chromey squiggles.
But no, for real, like that's what it's going to say, and it's going to say like the medium is going to be like the software, and like that's what's going to be next to it. It's not going to be on separate pages anymore. It's just going to be on the same page.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? I just want to add like the fact that NFTs have championed the digital medium before it wasn't even possible till the last year. That's insane.
I mean, we talk about reimagining art, like that's a huge part of it.
Right.
I'm curious what y'all think as artists about the ownership wave we're seeing. I think Web3 is opening up all these different possibilities for ownership. We see CCO, you see Bored Apes, for example, commercial rights to a particular piece of art. How do y'all feel about that from an artist perspective? Who wants to dive in?
I personally, I'll say it, I've never seen a good example of like giving away the rights. I haven't seen one example that's been a well-executed one.
I love it. I'm having a panel to talk about CCO. I'm having you on because you're like, it's hard to find skeptics. Sometimes the NFT
I just, look, there's like burger joints and this and that.
I gotta get traditional artists. That's where I find my skeptics.
I'm just real, and I'm not trying to be rude to anyone. There's a lot of like interesting, and I think that there should be a million like attempts. I think that's very important because like anything that moves things forward, there's always like attempts, and I think each thing might move it forward, and there will be a good example. And Snowpro, we had this conversation last night, and he pointed to my hat, and he said that's the example of a collaboration or whatever. But this was a collaboration. It wasn't necessarily like an owner going off on their own and creating an entity that is doing whatever. I just think that it will exist. I just haven't seen one yet that has impressed me personally.
There's a narrative during the whole CCO debacle, which was pretty significant, that said that if it's not CCO, it's not an NFT, right? And this kind of goes back to this, I think, issue that an NFT is not a medium, an NFT is a technology, and very much it's an NFT, and very much people should utilize that technology in however way they freaking want to use it. And I think I don't necessarily, I think CCO is a brilliant concept. I just have a problem with the backwards integration. Like the idea that somebody should say, oh, I came up with this idea of CCO, and now you, artist, creator, need to then embrace it for your project. Otherwise, it's not actually relevant in the NFT space. And I'm like, well, who are you in this NFT space? And why are you making the rules? And so for every, like,
I'm an anonymous Twitter troll. That's why.
And like, for example, there's a project, the Cryptodes, and like the little nouns. I think they're cute as hell. And maybe they're not meant to be art for the sake of art itself. And I find my conversation is often trying to talk about art for the sake of art itself. But I still like to be a degenerate every now and then and dive into these projects. And I love that they're CCO, but they started CCO, and that was the intent of the artist, not a bullying of the community to push it that way. I think that the concept of CCO would be very much better received. Like it'd be something that I would probably more actively participate in if it wasn't presented to the world in such a brash and like pushy way.
Kind of dogmatic.
It was so, it just felt wrong, and it felt against the ethos of Web3 as well. So it, but I do like it as a concept, and I think it's really interesting that we have so much representation of IP here, right? So I ignorantly, because I didn't know, literally I didn't think anybody was going to buy my Chromium Squiggles, I picked this license that existed called the NFT license because I was making an NFT. That one offers some commercial exploitation rights to the holders. You've got Creative Commons stuff. Are you Creative Commons as well? What's your license? Do you
nothing.
have? Oh, zero license.
It's art.
Well, no, yeah, but you have.
It's just no, like I own the IP.
Sure, yeah. I mean, but like Creative Commons, for example, would give you your people the right to hang it on the wall.
Oh,
the
yeah,
punks, for example, never even give a license. So punks literally, like technically, you never had the license to hang it in your house, to even print it, like because there was just never a license established. So the entirety of the IP was kept with the creators. Bored Apes, you have. A more open license, but not CCO. There's still some control over it. And then for your fine art, what license do you use? Do you have a CC license, a Creative Commons license?
I mean, I own that work. I haven't, I didn't sell IP.
Cool. Yeah. So I think it's interesting to see like the breadth of.
Right.
I think we will see a lot of different use cases that will be beneficial. I just, it's nothing has stood out to me as like the one yet,
And I think I'm sorry, Tyler.
Please.
Well, I think it's up to us. We have this enormous responsibility to kind of redefine what that means. And look, people are going to demand what they want to demand, right? People want what they want, but as long as we set the exact intentions and incentives behind our own art, right? I think then we can only trust in that. I think,
Yeah.
Trust artists.
Yeah, I think it's really important to leave that decision up to the artist per project. Like, there's just so many different reasons why you might create the project, right? CC0, it can be really interesting if you're trying to develop a project that's supposed to be like foundational for other people to build on, right? It's kind of like great for that, but you have to know that like Walmart could tomorrow use your work for their advertisements, and you have to be okay with that. Like.
And then if Walmart uses it, does it ruin the rest of the collection for the other holders?
Right.
I mean, you could have a way. You could put a character in porn. Like you could do really.
Right. Yeah, Walmart is the least of my concerns.
And I'm like, Walmart.
That's
But it's a good point. People are,
You heard it here,
perhaps,
our
like short-sighted about those potential consequences. And I think the artist is much more likely to be thinking long-term, like, I want my art to have a healthy lifespan, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to respect the artist's decision around what kind of rights they want to associate with the work.
Yeah, I've come around to seeing value in a CCO or in a commercial rights for individual, characters, for example, in terms of the marketing power of 10,000 people. Well, it's usually not that, right? But 5,000 people or something who can go out and help spread it. But I agree, we're never going to be fully one or the other because you can dilute a brand so easily that way.
A lot of this space is about testing with precedents, and we haven't established precedents, right? So the day that a hate group like embraces a CCO project as their logo, I think people are really going to have like a backflip in their mind. Like the people that were just the artists that created it and they wanted it to be that way, that's great. But the people pushing it, there's some projects that have backwards integrated into CCO, right? And the day that happens, I think those artists they're going to feel attached to something that does not fall within their value set. And that's terrifying. And that's why I have such a hard time, like, just even picturing it the unknowns are huge. We're just getting started in this space. Like this, we don't know what's coming, and that's something that very easily could come and could ruin what was otherwise created with like beautiful artistic intent or good intentions. And that's terrifying to me. And I feel like, we just need to test those precedents for people to kind of find a happy medium.
We only have a few seconds left here, so I want to just go to each of you maybe, and start with you, Seneca, of just what you have upcoming. I know you're really focused on your fine art. We've seen some of it up on the screen. It's incredible. So kind of the next phase of your legacy, talk to us about what's next in 30 seconds or less.
Well, thank you, Reilly, firstly, and thank you to CoinDesk, and I owe you guys one. I'm so honored to be here. But yes, I have some work coming up, some paintings that I've made, and the future's looking very bright. I'm just excited to make meaningful bodies of work. We talked about legacy. What does that mean, leaving something behind? But I'm really just down for the ride and trying to do something good.
Do you know where they'll be dropping? Is it
No.
Spoke site or on a...
Details to come.
Details to come. Perfect. And on that note, we hit our mark. Thank you all so much for coming and joining us. Thank you all so much. You're awesome.
Thank you, Charlie.